Hello and welcome back for part 2 or chapter 2, 2.0 Binary Sleuths and Social Architects. And that's just a fancy name for exploring OSINT and social engineering. So that's what we're going to do here. Now, I want to remind you that this video series is not just about passing the ISC2 certification. It is about getting an understanding, a well-rounded understanding of the very basics of cybersecurity. So building that initial foundation, and that's what we're doing through this series. So let's get started with 2.0. So first of all, we should define OSINT, or open source intelligence. It is the process of collecting and analyzing publicly available information to gather insights, and that means publicly available information. That's the key there. So what a lot of people don't realize is essentially OSINT has been around for a while, okay? Now, the term OSINT and social engineering, were really kind of combined. They're now, becoming separate as OSINT becomes a talent and a skill all in itself. There are people who do OSINT as a professional career. All right. Now, some of those folks are ethical hackers and they take what they learn into a hack. Some people are just doing OSINT to figure out certain things about people, about perhaps where a ship is, where it's docked recently, where it's going in the way of environmental. Okay. But OSINT actually started back in the 19th century, early 20th century, utilizing newspapers and journals and radio broadcasts. People would listen to these. They would pull out, they would make notes of, key information that was given. Okay. Establishment of the BBC, the monitoring service in 1939, and the U.S. Foreign Broadcast Monitoring Service in 1941. Now, if you think about 1941, right, this coincides with a war, and it's all about intelligence, okay? The Cold War era, extensive use, from both sides of the Iron Curtain to gauge, those military capabilities of the other. What are they doing, right? Where are they? What technology are they developing, okay? So, it's been around for a long time. Post-Cold War, reduced that prominence, with government agencies regulating OSINT. So it became a lesser role because at this time, there's no role, there's no war, there's no threat. Okay. And OSINT is about collecting information, okay, to for anything really, but in cybersecurity, it's about collecting information on what might be a risk. And we'll look at that here in a little bit, okay? So as it got sort of denoted, librarians, researchers, overshadowed by, classified intelligence information. So it got downgraded. These were the folks that did it. But here comes the 21st century, and the Renaissance, right? The emergence of social media and smartphones, and thus all of this data and more risk, right? So, surge of readily available open source data becomes reaffirmed. There are public databases. You can look at a lot of, say, court records, arrest records, house transactions, taxes, etc., all available publicly on the web. Okay. So OSINT again became more significant in modern intelligence practices, and of course, as a way to find risks associated with how hackers might get into a company, okay? Because what we know is the biggest risk to a company is the human element, okay? As we discussed in the last video, a very, very high percentage, depending on which study you read, states that the majority of ransomware attacks start with the end user. That end user being, basically convinced to click on a link. So let's look at the OSINT action plan or methodology in action. it is really no different than any IT software project, hardware project, networking project. We have we have this framework, if you will, that we can follow. And that starts with preparation, moves to collection, processing, analysis, and then dissemination, reporting what it is that we found. Okay? So, again, it's collecting data perhaps on a person based on their social media, based on court records, based on YouTube, maybe they have a YouTube channel, and sometimes based on stuff that may or may not be available, on the dark web, for example. So preparation is really like it's like the standard preparation or planning an IT project, okay? We've got to define the objectives, what is our scope, and what are our tactics as it pertains to completing an OSINT action plan, okay? Now, sometimes the scope, especially if you're hired by a company to collect OSINT data, they might limit your scope to say, okay, you're only limited to, really highly available public information on social media, right? And that's entirely up to them on where you can go to find data. Okay. But we get all this information so that we have a clear direction in which to go. We don't get rabbit holed. It becomes an efficient process for us to complete an OSINT investigation in a timely manner, at a reasonable cost. So collection is just that. We use reconnaissance to gather information on a target from publicly available sources, such as social media. So if we're doing this on a high-end individual, say a CEO of a company, and we're creating a risk profile for this CEO, we might look at their Facebook. Do they have TikTok? Do they have Instagram? What are they posting? Are they posting about the company? What are their personal interests? Basically, what information could I use, okay, to influence them to do something I need them to do, to say gain access to data, to get them to tell me about the new project that they're working on. Sometimes, on the dark side of things, the unethical side of things, companies will hire, people to do this work against competing companies, and sometimes completely legally, right? So that they know what the company's doing, how they match up, etc. Finally, once we collect all that data based on our scope so that we don't get rabbit holed, we're not going and looking for things that really aren't relevant, okay? We process that data, and that means simply organizing it, converting it into, collected data and usable formats. We may, choose keywords out of it. By the way, using AI, for example, let's say you screen scraped in your process. You screen scrape the corporate website. You're looking for keywords, that match keywords of the CEO or whatever the case may be. We can give that information, to AI and have it tell us what words show up the most. Okay, for example, so, utilizing AI to do this. But at that point, we may create a spreadsheet, depending on the size, we may create a small database to organize that information so that it's usable. So we've taken all that data, we've organized it, it's all together, we're ready to analyze it. So at this point, we examine that data for commonality, for key points that we might want to exploit within an exploit, okay? Risks that we see as an OSINT specialist, risks we see as it pertains to the target. So remember, this isn't just about people. This can be about locations, it can be about things, it can be about organizations, okay? But a lot of it is done on the human element, okay? Finally, dissemination. So we've done all that analysis. We've figured out, we've pulled the key information that we want to share with our clients. and it's time to create the report. And this is why I said in our chapter 1, it is so important to not just have the technical skills, but have those softer employability skills, because not only are you going to write a professional report, all that spelling and grammar needs to be correct, it needs to be professional. Remember, everything that you write is a representation of you as a professional, right? So even today, I use Grammarly as a means of catching mistakes, okay? So something to consider. But as we write this report, we need to know how to write technical reports that businesses need. We need to remember who our audience is. A lot of times as we write this report, we are not writing to a technical audience. We're not writing to the cybersecurity folks who understand a lot of the 3-letter acronyms we do. We're writing to executives, and in order to make this palatable and readable for them, we've got to get rid of all the technical jargon, okay? Their job, and the reason they hired us, was to assess risk and find risk, and, within the organization, whether that be people, places, things, etc. Okay? So, ethical hackers are not just banging on computers, they're finding ways to get around physical security within an organization so that they have access to the computers that hold the data. Okay? So, important as we write this report, keep it short, clear, concise. And then there's those soft skills again, because you might be asked to come in and give a presentation based on your report that they've already read. You're giving that presentation. It's a time for them to ask you additional questions or findings that they might be concerned with. So that's it for part 1. Like I said, I like to keep these short and sweet so you can consume them. Come back for the next part. Please don't forget to subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Every little bit helps. I'm on a teacher's salary. Y'all take care. We'll see you for part 2, where we continue to talk OSINT. What we'll do is we'll actually look at OSINT in action through a scenario. See you then.